And Mark, it's always a thing, isn't it, when you're at the end of board meeting feeling like you're just having to, rush through, and I didn't want that. I wanted us to come back slightly refreshed and back into it. So we're at item 24 now then, please, and with some items to note amongst governors, but they're important matters, of course. Our premises assurance model progress report. So Mark, shall I turn to you, and in the same spirit as we usually do, ask you to emphasise anything you would wish from the report to us, please?
Great, thank you, Chair. And yeah, so I'll take the paper as read, and as you've said, the paper is to note. But if I can just very quickly explain what this is and what the requirements are really, and the insurances and improvements that are seen in this premises assurance model report. So the NHS PAM's an assessment model and tool effectively that we use to test and check and assure ourselves of the healthcare environment associated with risks, hazards and unsafe premises effectively. And it's now an NHS mandated requirement for us to bring this to board and demonstrate the position, which is what I'm doing now with this report, of course. And I think it's important to also note that the CQC do use this self-assessment tool, PAM, when doing an inspection to ensure that we are meeting our safety and statutory compliance measures in managing the estate. It focuses on 5 domains, which are mainly safety, patient experience, efficiency, effectiveness and governance. And I think it's fair to say what this really is an assessment of really core areas of estate management around things like Legionella, asbestos, fire, electricity, and the management and governance of estate compliance in terms of law. So that's effectively what it's looking at under those 5 domains. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an explanation of what this really is. The overall result for us this year is good across all those 5 domains. And I think it's important to note, just looking at that report and picking out the bits that have improved over the last 12 months, because despite a very tough operating year, of course, that we've all felt, both in terms of resource and management, there's areas of improvement in compliance document management, water safety systems, which is Legionella effectively, decontamination processes that are linked to IPC. Again, that's been very important with COVID, and laundry and linen. And again, important because we experienced some national issues with that. So those additional areas of improvement have been really, really helpful. And it's been nice to see that demonstrated. And in addition to that, there's 3 extra elements they've included this year, which is fire safety, annual reporting in general, and how that's seen by us at board, and net zero. So it's nice that they've thrown those 3 additional ones in. We're proving good in all those areas, and we can demonstrate that. Excuse me. So we're successfully able to demonstrate high levels of compliance and insurance across all of the areas. And whilst we've got an old estate, I think, again, it's important to note that we are in the 17th lowest percentage of old estate across all trust in NHS England. This PAM model demonstrates that we are safely managing the compliance and assurance at a high standard of safety across the trust and the premises that we operate in. So I think there's nothing more for me to say on that, and I'll close that PAM agenda item at that and ask if there's any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Mark, sorry if it was me that misunderstood a point you raised there about the age of our estate. Could I just ask you to clarify that bit? Did you say we were within the bottom 17%?
So
does that mean the oldest 17%? I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify what you meant by that bit. Yeah.
No, you're right, Max. Apologies. So what that means is if you look at the age profile of the NHS estate in NHS in England, if you want, we're coming we're basically in the 17th% eldest quartile of the estate across all of the whole portfolio. So there are only some other trust properties that actually fall below the current build age as an average of our portfolio. So it really demonstrates, I think, how, old the premises are that we're trying to manage.
Thank you. No, that's great. Yes, on a continuum of estate age, we're right up at that top end then, aren't we, of the age? Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That's extremely helpful. And a great summary, actually, Mark, of the report. Thank you. We're being asked to note the continued progress in reapplication and to acknowledge that the data has been approved by Mark as executive lead for this directorate, and the data will be submitted onto the new online NHS England platform by the 9th of September 2022 deadline. So, colleagues, is there anything anybody would wish to raise in query or question or anything else discussion? Mel, please do come in.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mark, for that. It was just a question about who makes the assessment. What's the makeup of the team? I'm presuming it's a self-assessment, because I'm just sort of noting that the sign-off and the approvals is via you as the Director of Estates and Facilities and the EF leadership team, which begs the question, are you kind of marking your own homework, I guess, and where do we get that objectivity in the makeup of the people who are making the assessment, most especially in the bits about patient experience bit? How do we include patients in that? What's the process? I'm not clear, and it doesn't say. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, Mel. It is a self-assessment, very similar to what the patient-led assessment for the care environment is. And I think very similar to the assessment that Saj alluded to right at the beginning of Trust Board around emergency preparedness. So the way that the governance structures work, and this is not unusual in any trust or in the Estates and Facilities Directorate, whereby we have specialist working groups for all areas of compliance. So as much as the report and the domains do talk about efficiency, and kind of the patient environment, actually the questions, the SAQ questions that are asked, despite them fitting in those 5 domains, are actually much harder than that, if I can put them like that. And actually they're asking for statutory compliance around fire and asbestos and a range of other things. Really it's more focused, that end, than perhaps the care and the softer side. So therefore, the SAQ questions are directly targeted at the working groups within estates and facilities. So there's a Legionella safety group, there's an electricity compliance group, there's an environmental group, etc. So those teams, if you want, sat under those headings actually look at the SAQ questions because they're sent to them, and they self-assess where they feel they are in line with hospital technical memoranda and compliance fundamentally. So it is very much targeted that way. Yes, it is a self-assessment, and we are following the protocol and guidelines that are given to us by the premises assurance model. So that's the process that we use.
Thank you very much, Mel.
So is this kind of sort of son of, I remember Pete visits, for example, Pete assessments, where, when we did those in a foundation trust, we would ask governors to be involved, as the sort of patient's eyes and their experience, because I can understand there's a difference between, you should have a policy. Have you got one? Is it in date? Is it extant? Does it comply with? And that's a tick. But the softer things from a user's perspective is, and amongst users account, clinicians, managers, everybody works here, plus patients and others, not just necessarily the people who are the sort of technical people in those areas. And I just wonder the extent to which any of those have been involved in the process.
I think it's fair to say they haven't. We followed the protocol, but I think certainly based on what you say, I'm absolutely happy and supportive to open that up. So as we start moving forwards and looking at next assessments, that we actually broaden that scope out and invite people to come in and work on those groups, to participate in them, to be a part of the scoring and the assurance, really. So that's very, very welcomed. I'm very happy to open that up. And certainly look at the areas where we think we can broaden that out to.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, go on, Mel. Sorry. Yeah, that's great. Mel, you raised a great point there, because of course you're also bringing to fellow director colleagues that there's an element of trust to be placed in this assessment, in terms of it being within estates and facilities, and that's fair. So thank you very much. In terms of our role to seek assurance, that was well said. And Mark, thank you for your offer to have a look at how you might more widely seek input into those assessments. So that's helpful. Thank you. Sugra, would you like to come in, please?
I think the point's just been made. It was really just to see whether there was the opportunity to explore a degree of independence, whether that was different teams from within estates looking at it. So, because sometimes when you're looking at documents, if you've not seen it because you've created it, you're not going to see it when you're doing an audit necessarily. And I think the point about involving people independent almost to walk through or to have a patient insight or a patient's view on it is also very helpful. So I think it's already been accepted that there's an opportunity here to create that independence and some peer involvement, perhaps in what is otherwise a self-assessment.
Thank you, Sugra. May I say you articulated that very well. I've seen it in other public sector organisations. So, and Mark, of course, this isn't any suggestion that there's anything wrong with the assessment. It's simply good questions regarding process and our transparency and diverse opinion and view. So great stuff. Yeah, thank you very much, Sugra. Yeah. Are there any further comments or questions or queries of Mark? No, I'm glad we've touched on that detail there. That's extremely helpful. And so we are being asked to, as I say, continue, note the continued progress and not acknowledge that the data has been approved. And we'll be going on to the, well, I'm assuming it has it, Mark? The paper does say the 9th of September deadline. So unless my paper's different to anybody else's, has it already gone on?
So I think that the thing here is it went to executive team in terms of the update on PAM to put on the PAM register, and under the PAM requirements, the trust boards are required to visually see what that PAM assessment actually presented and said. So what I've done today is basically demonstrated to you what went into the report and what's been submitted to NHSEI.
That's great stuff. Thank you very much, Mark. And Karen, thank you for your helpful comments in chat there as well, just to orientate us even better. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Thanks, colleagues. I'm assuming everything's approved as the recommendations in the paper. And I'll take you to item 25, staying with Mark, our annual security report. So, Mark, again, please.
Thank you. So again, I'll take the report as read and highlight some of the key progress areas in the management of security and address crime trends really within the trust. And I think, of course, it is important to note that the actual reporting period that this report looks at was predominantly focused on managing, again, in that difficult hospital environment with stringent COVID measures imposed nationally and locally. So I think that is important to understand, particularly around security that involved additional entrance door security, management of visitors and patients and a whole series of resource challenges as well. So I think, certainly the last security report we received was similar as well, but just because of the situation. And I think that just needs to be understood. But during the winter period, particularly, we looked at an additional in-house security team that supplemented our additional security response to be able to deal with all the issues I've described earlier, and importantly, to support the response to violence and aggression and physical assaults, and to support the safeguarding in the clinical teams in that. So the whole shift and focus was different, and we had to do things quite differently to manage those kind of environments, particularly on wards and in the ED environment. But if you look at the report, I think, and pick out some key elements, over the reporting period, there were 119 reported crimes. And I think the key around this is that 57% of those crimes actually, wherever they were focused and targeted, they were further progress and a decline, if you want, in the response to actually take that to prosecution has been seen, because only 15% of our reported crimes actually end up followed up, if you want, and taken through the process with the police authorities and leading to prosecution. So whilst we're capturing everything, I think there's some clear metrics there around the lack or the no want to follow some of these things up, despite a lot of work done to try and help support that. If you actually look at the 7-year comparison as well, just in terms of reported physical assaults, this does actually show a year-on-year reduction, 13% against last year's figures and 11% again against the year previously. However, the reporting or the lack of kind of that position, I think, does and is represented in those figures. So I think there's a key theme that's coming out this year around, you know, whilst the reporting numbers are getting better, there's a lack of response to want to try and push these things forwards to the police, if you want, to take things to a certain, to the next level. And I think, again, if you look at the violence and aggression incidents that are highlighted in that report, again, which is very positive, we have seen a reduction in incidents when you compare the last 7 years, 9% against last year and 11% reduction against the previous year. So I think based on all the intelligence the report's identifying, there's a range of areas of focus that we will now be focusing on from the intelligence and the metrics that this clearly picks up. As I've said, I think there's something about reporting of incidents to prosecution or to lead to prosecution and supporting that. There's also implementing a new partnership approach with West Yorkshire Police, and that's linked with the security teams and the AED management team and security team. So that's now a meeting where the teams are coming together to look at how to best manage ED services, because we know that's a key focus area, if you want. So West Yorkshire Police are working with us now to do that, and the first meeting's already happened. There's some good things that have already come out of that. We're also progressing with the agreement of a range of service areas across the trust, a new response to incidents by the provision of sending letters out, if you want. I'll call them warning letters, and they are detailed in the report, basically to patients or visitors who have entered our care or our establishment and who have been identified as either being aggressive, abusive or violent. So this is about deterrent, if you want. And I think in terms of implementing measures, the enhancement actually of what we call criminal behaviour diaries, i.e. known individuals, whereby we can actually start logging in, making a record of who they are, what they are and what they've done. And that again will lead to a level of action that we will take with West Yorkshire Police. So I think a whole raft of things that are really looking good, whilst a reduction in measures, some work to do it in that kind of area of focus. And if I just turn very briefly, I think just to car crime and theft, just as a separate part of this report, that in terms of its numbers has slightly increased in year, and there's a clear focused target on theft in our car parks, which are associated with sat navs and catalytic converters, and that's been seen nationally with 18 reported thefts across the trust, 12 of which are specific to car crime, and they've only led to 2 prosecutions, unfortunately. So again, I think it follows that same theme. We're working with West Yorkshire Police on this and have done actually for the last 8 months. There's more high-vis patrols that the police authority have put together. The PCSOs are doing more rounds, and we've made sure in the last 3 months coming out of COVID that actually the security teams are going back to doing more of their standard, I'll call them their SOP procedure checks, to make sure they're getting around the site the amount of times that we need them to. And there are actually checkpoints where we do monitor to make sure each of those points around the site have been met, you know, X amount of times per day. So we are getting out there effectively. I think importantly to mention, and it does say that in the report, that we are investing in CCTV and have done quite a lot over the last few years. And whilst we've got a big backlog maintenance programme, and going back to the discussions earlier we've just had around our aged estate and critical infrastructure risk that won't include CCTV because of priorities, we have still prioritised CCTV by using some level of last year's non-recurrent funding to buy equipment, which is now being installed under a different kind of process financially in Q3. So we're investing just under £100,000 in CCTV camera upgrades, which will further enhance externally to the work we've done over the last 2 years, which has predominantly been on all our corridor areas and circulation space. So I think that will really complete a whole package of CCTV. So I think the report identifies the security work plan for the 22-23 calendar period. So you'll see in there where the focus is, what we're doing and what that kind of strategy looks like, if you want. So I'm going to close what I'm talking about around that report now and open that up to any questions, really.
That's perfect, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Mark, I wouldn't ask you to identify them if this is the case, but I just wondered whether are there any vulnerable locations or times in relation to our vehicle crime pattern?
You know what, we've analysed that very recently, Max, and that there's nothing that we can specifically tie down to an area, anything that's out of sight or out of mind. I mean, we clearly know that the thefts are, as I've said, it's catalytic converters and sat navs, and it's particular, I think, to Volkswagen and Skodas and Seats particularly. So there's some really useful intelligence, but actually it's not helpful in us being able to manage and be preventative in any measures. So we've had to very much just go for a kind of holistic approach to dealing with it.
Thank you. No, thank you, Mark. I'm delighted to hear of the investment in CCTV and good working partnership with the police. That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. I'll pause for a moment then. I realise we're at the end of a long board meeting, but this is the annual security board report. It's important stuff. May I ask whether John Prashar, as sort of health and safety champion, John, for a long time, and maybe Altaf with some interest in security management, is there anything from a non-executive perspective that anybody would wish to check? If not, I quite understand, of course. And Janet, would you like to come in, please? Yeah.
One very quick question, really, Mark, and thank you for the report. It was quite an eye-opener for me what you manage, and a difficult footprint with open access. So I recall last Christmas, Mel sent a message around because staff in E&D were subject to increased verbal abuse. And it seemed to be, and it was a shame because it was around Christmas time. It was a shame any time, but it was particularly around Christmas time. And I was just wondering, and it's a minor point given all of the other things that you've just said and what you're managing, but it's a really important point, isn't it? People start to feel vulnerable at that time. What other things could be put in place through that period to protect staff so they feel safe?
Yeah, Janet, I can say actually, and it's not in the report, that the enhanced security that we put in place was actually and is maintained in ED and maternity. So we were very clear on, when we retrospectively look back at the whole situation, the pressure points and areas that needed something extra. So we have ensured that both those two areas, because those are the areas, I think quite obviously, to be fair, that they did need the extra. So, right now they are getting, to be fair, more than other areas for all the reasons, those and plenty more, as I'm sure you can well imagine. So we have kept that alive. And right. I think, to be fair, there was only an incident earlier this week in our maternity service building whereby I've just read the report actually first thing this morning, and the security presence was a deterrent, despite us having some physical damage. Looking at the process, it worked well, so that made the difference.
That's great. So for people who are using the service, does any of that challenge of people's behaviour flow through regularly to you, who don't, people don't feel safe, patients don't feel safe? Just wondering if it's flowing through.
I don't think there's anything kind of mechanically specific that comes through security, if you want, but I think certainly in a whole range of other forums, this is about the feeling, the environment and everything else that does come through. And I think we are picking it up that way and dealing with it that way. So, whilst I've got the mechanical service, I think it's everything else that informs, and we've got all the right you know, be it from meetings, forums and escalation processes to pick up on those things. And we do react to them when, of course, when we need to. And I think, you know, we have done that, and it will always be a challenge. But we keep doing everything we can as we're picking stuff up and as we're being proactive with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, and that's a great point, isn't it, about visitors, whether they be patients, carers, accompanying colleagues, whether they feel safe. And yeah, it's an assumption. I must admit that's a good point, Janet, because it's an assumption I've always made that if we had those patterns, they would emerge, and we'd get to know about perhaps unsafe areas, etc. So thank you for raising that visitor perspective. Yeah, thank you. Any further comments? And I asked if Altaf or John wanted to say anything, but I'm assuming you're happy with what you've seen there, Altaf and John. So I'll move on from that. Yeah, we're happy to. Altaf, did you want to come in? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say I'm happy with the report and the subsequent responses. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, I did want to make sure there was a good non-executive perspective on what we're seeing there, and I'm grateful to Matt for his work and for the tabling of the annual report, Mark, which we note as asked. And thank you for the detail you provided. That was really helpful. Thanks. Okay, we've dealt with item 26, of course, and so item 27 is our membership plan update. A terrific paper, actually, outlining some of the great work that's being done by a team of people there. John, anything you would wish us to particularly note from that paper, please?
It's a piece of work that's ongoing. The membership plan was agreed in November last year. The group was set up in December. Julie's a part of that group. Thank you, Julie, for your ongoing help. Developed an action plan, which is attached as an appendix. We don't need to go through the detail of it. Slightly knocked off course by changes in the governor membership, but back on an even keel now. They've met 3 times. The 3 priorities they set were around increasing the number of members with email addresses, recruiting more younger members aged between 16 and 22, and also better representation from the Keighley district. These 3 things are important. The first one about the email addresses is because increasingly we want to use digital, not because it's easier, although it possibly is, but because we can make it more relevant, more accessible, more timely, you know, and we can give people more opportunity to engage with the trust if we can engage them digitally. At the moment, out of our 40,000 members, a very small number, Laura will know the exact number, do we have email addresses for? And the rest, all we can do is periodically write to them. So one of the things we are doing, this is happening very shortly, is a big mail out to all of the registered addresses we've got, inviting people to give us permission to contact them by email, give us their email addresses, give us permission to contact them by email. There's a kind of irony that we're writing out to them to do this, but it's the only way we have of getting in touch, because many of these people joined in 3 waves of opt-in membership in 2007, 2008 and 2011, and we harvested a large number of names and we've stayed in touch with them. But if I'm being really honest with you, Max, we haven't really been able to engage with them. You know, it's a 2-way street. So this mail out, I suspect, will probably result in some people saying, no, thanks very much. I don't want to be a member. I didn't even know I was, and I'd like to stand down. However, what I do think it will do is give us a greater proportion of people who are digitally engaged. And whilst we will always leave the door open for people who can't manage digital interaction, that's very important, I think there's a real opportunity here to say, OK, well, maybe our overall membership is reduced from a number of 40,000 to something less. But those who are now engaged, many more of them were able to reach digitally. And I think that's an important consideration. In terms of the age profile, this really concerns me. We have 1%, 350 members, 1% of our public membership is under the age of 30. 40% of our membership is over the age of 60. So, you know, there's just a real kind of dissonance there between both ends of the age profile. And I think it's in our interest to try and redress that. We'll never completely reverse it or even it out, but we really want to work to try and increase the the proportion of younger people, by which I mean under 30, still a long way away from me, but if we can increase the number of younger people and members. And then finally, Keithley, that's just about geographic representation. And it's not grossly underrepresented. When you look at the comparisons of the different areas, we've got a similar proportion of people from the Keighley end of the patch as we have a proportion from, say, the city end of the patch. But nonetheless, it's a relatively small number which we'd like to address. So all of that is detailed in the action plan, the actions we are taking, the mass mail out, working with education and training, different ways with HR we can reach out to young people, using our governors and their reach to try and extend into some of the areas where we're less well served. So there is lots going on. We will have more to report, but at the moment it's a work in progress.
Thank you very much indeed, John. I commend those 3 particular objectives that you outlined there, and yeah, you've answered perfectly for me. I might have raised with you, is it a little unambitious to go for the target email that we have, but I can see from the method that you've outlined that clearly we're trying to get as many as we can onto digital means. Delighted to hear that, John. Thank you. Yeah. So colleagues, some good work on the membership plan, really important. Good, strong aims as well, of course. We do need to redress as best we can the age profile, don't we? So there's some really good work going on there. I'm grateful to those involved, and I'll ask whether there's any comments. Mel, would you like to come in, please? Yeah.
I just would like us to bear in mind, I guess, that the whole concept of foundation trust and the involvement and public representation in the shape of a council of governors existed before the idea of integrated care systems. It existed before citizens' involvement. So there are so many other ways in which we now seek to and harness the views and opinions and insights of the people that we collectively serve as a partnership, that this, what I would stress is, whilst we might, you might sort of feel some of the targets are a bit unambitious, there are other avenues in which we should be connecting with the public that aren't exclusively via our Council of Governors. So I don't think we need to necessarily put as much emphasis as has been in previous years on that being the only route by which we can get that voice heard.
Okay, thank you, Mel. Yeah. And any other comments or thoughts regarding our membership plan? 40,000 members. Happy? Yeah, it's obviously some good work going on, isn't it? So thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for that, John. We happily note that. And the final item on our board, John, is now you always have a slight smile on your face when you present this one, the use of the trust seal. And so I'll leave it with you, John, as to how you would wish to advise us of this use.
I think Laura's going to pick this one up, so I'm not smiling at all. This is serious business, Laura.
Okay, right. Laura, please.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, nothing in particular to highlight. We are required to record every time that we seal a document, and usually that's done with Matthew Horner, our Director of Finance, and myself. Obviously, we keep a record of that, and we're required to report that to the board, so that this is fulfilling that requirement. But there's nothing in particular I want to highlight on any of the documents that have been sealed.
Thank you very much indeed. So colleagues can see, use it on 4 occasions. And we're simply being asked to receive and note that information. Are we content to do so? Does anybody have any further questions regarding the use of the trust seal? It would appear not. Okay, that's great. I know we've run over a little here. I'm stealing a bit of time from our closed meeting, which we go on to, which of course relate to matters that might have personal information in them, or indeed commercial sensitivities. So just got a couple of things on there, haven't we, as a closed board. However, we are at the end of our board meeting. I'm grateful to everybody for their contributions, and we've had some terrific discussions here, of course. Would anybody wish to bring to my attention, there was no other business, would anybody wish to bring to my attention anything they feel arises from today's board meeting that we may not have picked up as an action point? So perhaps matters to refer to board committees, academies, or elsewhere. Was there anything in particular that people felt wasn't appropriately noted and picked up? It felt to me like we did have a good, strong discussion around all the things we've dealt with. A lot of important things today, as ever, of course. Okay. So again, I know I've done this 3 or 4 times now, and I don't know Katie personally, particularly. I've met Katie, of course, but well done, Katie, for helping people with the slide presentations, and indeed for the authorship of many of the papers. So well done to you, and thanks for making our meeting go as efficiently as it possibly can. We're at the end of our open board meeting. We meet together in November, 10th of November, and we will. Of course, we will. It'll be an open meeting, face to face, and so it may well be that we have people joining us at that. You know that I always bring to your attention the annexes, the papers at 1, 2, and 3. I know you'll have read those and seen them. And in the absence of any final further comments, we will consider this open board closed now. And I'll repeat my